Hey class, today we are talking about media and the impact that media has upon individuals and upon culture, and just the general ability of media to have a broad influence or a broad impact in the culture. So, the first thing that we generally do, and I usually throw this out every once in a while in class, is we should define our terms, or at least our term for today's lesson. So, media generally, it's the various technological processes that allow communication between or among people. So when we're talking about media, we can be talking about technological processes. That can be part of it. And your book would land there. Now, when we talk about media more colloquially, we're talking about like the news media, for example. When we're talking about the media, that might be one way that people use the term media. But what we're talking about is the plural of medium. And a medium can be a means of conveyance. And so in this case, it could be the means of conveying a message. And so the media can be the multiple or the aggregate of all of the ways that messages can be communicated. So when we're talking about media, we can have books can be a form of media. Music can be a form of media. The news on the television, on the radio can be, or on the PC, on the computer, on your phone, those can be forms of media. Also, there's social media, right? So it's media because it's a way of communicating a message. But it's generally more used instead of in just strictly informationally or in a professional setting or for advertisement, which it still is used for advertisement. And it may be used professionally, but it's used in a more interpersonal way generally. So social media is a media form, but it wouldn't be necessarily considered mass media in the traditional definition. But anything can be media. Anything that's written can be media. Anything that you hear, like music, can be a form of media as well. So it doesn't have to be the traditional news media to be media. That's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about ways in which a message is communicated. Music can be a message. Poetry can be a message. Prose can be a message. We can have nonfiction, fiction. Any of that can be media. So even pictures, photographs can be their media. A message can be communicated through an image. So when we're talking about the media, one thing that comes up a lot with the various forms of media is the concept of mass media, right? Because media can be interpersonal, right? Like I can use paper and a pen and I can mail a letter to someone, and that technically is media, right? However, when we're talking about media, most of the time we're talking about mass media, and that would be things that reach a lot of people. So when we're talking about mass media, which is where the bulk of the discussion is going to focus today, there are four traits of mass media. So anything that is to be considered mass media, it has these four traits. And the first trait is that it is one to many. Okay? So the communication is one to many. And so I'll give you an example. Like any major news outlet, there's one outlet. Like CNN is the outlet, or Fox, or MSNBC, or ABC, or the Daily Wire, Breitbart, BBC, whatever news organization you want. It's that outlet to many individuals, right? And it literally can go to millions of people, but the idea is one to many. Or if you have media in the form of music, it's one band, one group, or if it's a solo artist, that one artist to many, many people. So that would be the first trait of mass media, is the concept of one to many. The second is that mass media is one-way communication. All right, so for example, if you have someone on Channel 11 News, all right, they're not talking back and forth. They're not having a communication with every single viewer, or really even hardly ever do you see with any viewers, right? They might have like call in, if you turned 102, call in and we'll celebrate your birthday, or send in a text or whatever. But generally, it's one-way communication where that person is, or that organization is delivering their message, whatever that message is, and the receivers get the message. But there's not really an open line of communication both ways. Whereas like interpersonal media, which is not mass media, like if you're texting someone or you have a phone call with someone, there's a back and forth. It's not one way, it's two-way communication. But with mass media, there's not that availability for two-way communication. So it's one to many, one way. The one is giving the communication to the many, and that's the direction the communication is going, and not in the reverse. Okay, the third trait of mass media would be anonymous receivers. Right? So if CNN puts a story out, right, they don't know the names of every single one of their viewers. They probably don't know the names of 1% of their viewers. They don't know the addresses. They don't know their faces. They don't know their stories, right? It's anonymous receivers. Whoever happens to type in, CNN.com or turn the news on to CNN, or same, if you go to the Daily Wire, right? They don't know the names of their receivers. They don't know the identities of the people that are consuming their media, right? Now, there might be surveys out there where they can get demographics, and that's different. They might be able to say that, based on surveys, that 20% of our readers are this age bracket, 50% are male, 50% are female, 30% are over the age of 25 or whatever it is, which would mean that the remainder would be under 25. So it'd be like a youth news outlet. But the idea is it's anonymous. They don't know the names, the locations, the addresses, the life stories of their receivers. Generally speaking, they might know a couple of them or a few, right? But not the masses. Okay. And the fourth trait is there's a distinction between producers and audiences, right? Those who are producing the media that is being consumed, there's a distinction, right? There's I am the producer, you are the receiver. My role is to make, your role is to consume. Right? And there's not confusion between that, right? That's the distinction. Like Fox or MSNBC or ABC or whatever it is, BBC, Breitbart, if we're talking about news, or even if we're talking about like music, right? So whoever the artist is, right? Like Kenny Chesney, there's a distinction between the producer of the music and the audience. Like if you see an example would be like a concert. Now a concert could be a form of media, but I'm saying like at the concert, the producer of the mass media, he's the one on stage, or she's the one on stage, right? If we're talking about Kenny Chesney, he's on stage. And everyone else is standing in the audience. Their role is to listen, his role is to deliver content. Similarly, if you look at mass media from like Apple Music, the producer's role is make the music, and the audience's role is to consume, to listen to the music, right? So there's a distinction between producers and audiences. So the four roles, or the four distinguishing factors of mass media. One is that it's one to many. Two is it's one way. There's not a dialogue. It's just basically a monologue. Three is the receivers are anonymous. And four is there's a distinction between producers and audiences. And now, if we're looking at mass media or media in general, media can really shape the way people view things. So there are a lot of different ways to explain this. Some people call it the echo chamber. Like there can be a trend of people to consume media that matches their ideology. Right? It can also be called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias can also be something different, all right? But it's the idea that you're looking for something, and when someone confirms your point of view, you think it's correct, right? So we all tend to be drawn into this, but media can shape our opinions or can help us stay entrenched in an opinion if we're consuming media that is what we want to hear. Right? So we have that availability today in culture. We can tune into whatever media outlet we want that's going to tell us what we want to hear, and we can have our opinions confirmed, right? Also, if you look at social media influencing media, there's a lot of controversy right now, especially like currently, like right now, today. and yesterday and the day before. An example would be Facebook is pulling down people's pages that are organizing protests against states' stay-at-home orders. So you have a giant social media platform, and they're controlling the narrative. Right now, in all fairness, they are a private business, and they can do what they want on their platform. So they have the right to say who can stay and who can go. But that being said, there are millions and millions and millions of people on these platforms, and Facebook is one platform that if you're organizing, if you post on your Facebook page that you're organizing any kind of demonstration or protest, which by the way is your First Amendment right, peaceful protest, if you're doing that and Facebook finds out about it, they will pull your page. And I've already seen several instances of this occurring where Facebook is controlling the narrative. They don't want people going out right now, and they don't want their platform to be used for that. And they're a private business, that's their right. However, they're controlling the narrative. So they're a social media outlet, but they're also kind of mass media. It's one of those blended forms because they allow news to be on their sites and they allow narratives to be put forward, but it's also a way to communicate interpersonally. So they're controlling the narrative, which means all you're getting on Facebook would be a lack of that. So what you see is there aren't people organizing protests on Facebook, but the reason that you see that is because Facebook is deleting the pages that are organizing protests. So they control what the public sees, and that shapes public opinion, because you might go on Facebook and say, I've never seen a page about protest. Nobody's protesting. Or the people that are protesting are a bunch of weirdos. You might be thinking that. I'm not saying they are, by the way, but I'm saying that could be a bias that we have, right? The idea of ethnocentrism, like our cultural viewpoint is correct and anything else is considered weird, that's ethnocentrism, right? But if we're able to see the narrative of, hey, there are other things going on out there, right, that might change our minds. So media can do that, right? The way a story is presented, the way a story is covered in the news media can shape the way we think about it. I've looked at, just as far as media control, I've looked at the same exact story covered by a news outlet that leans pretty far to the left and a news outlet that leans pretty far to the right. And they looked like entirely different stories. It was the same event. It was basically the same thing that happened. And one was, it was about something President Trump had said recently. And one was President Trump was the best person ever. And the other one was President Trump was the worst person ever. Right? I mean, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, not very much. But that was the idea of media can shape culture. And depending upon which media we consume, our mindsets can be shaped by that. And so media is extremely powerful, and especially mass media, because it's anonymous. You can't and it's one way. You can't dialogue back and forth. If you're like, well, I have an objection, you can't dialogue back and forth with that person, and you can't let other people know that you have a different point of view because they're all consuming that one-way communication, right? And that's just news media. Music, by the way, if we look at history, like rock and roll music had a massive influence on culture. And then when rock and roll, it morphed over the years into, there was early rock and roll, like Elvis Presley and the Beatles. And then you get rock, which would be, more like, I don't want to throw names out of bands that maybe aren't the best, but, like Creedence Clearwater Revival would be one. Lynyrd Skynyrd's, bands like that. I'm not giving sanction to those bands, by the way, but I'm saying that it morphed over time, right? And those genres carried a message, and the message changed, like into protest music. Like Janis Joplin would be an example of like war protest in the Vietnam era, where rock changed from happy rock about love songs to don't support the war. And it influenced a lot of people in the war effort in the Vietnam War era, so in the 60s and 70s. The support for that dropped because partially news media and partially music. And the social response to that partially was the hippie movement and the anti-war protest movement, right? So media can really influence the way we view things, and it can change the way culture goes. So it's a very powerful thing, and we'll delve into this very deeply in the coming days, but it's kind of cool to see the impact that media can have, and it can have a negative impact, but it can also have positive impacts. So that's just what I want you to see today, especially mass media. So just by way of review, media is a way of communicating a message, and mass media has four traits. It's one to many, one way, anonymous receivers, distinction between producers and audiences. All right, that's it for today. Continue the great work. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Otherwise, have a great weekend.